Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. I am Paul Bakker of Global VAT Compliance. Now, I've been working in indirect tax for a few decades now, and one thing that experience in this area teaches you is that changes in VAT are rarely as simple as the legislation makes them look. KSeF in Poland is no exception. It's an important milestone in Europe's move towards structured digital reporting, and while the idea is straightforward, the implementation never is. What KSeF really does is shift the attention back to something businesses tend to underestimate: data quality. Not the tax rules, not the rates, but whether your system speaks the same language as the FA3 schema, and when they don't, the invoices don't just contain an error, it legally doesn't exist. I often say that KSeF is very unforgiving. It gives you the truth in real time, whether you like it or not. You'll hear today that the biggest operational pressure points isn't issuing invoices, even though that's where everyone instinctively starts. It's actually receiving them. If your Polish suppliers start using KSeF before you're ready to pull and process those invoices automatically, your AP team will feel it immediately in delays, in cash flow, and in unexpected reconciliation work. Today, my colleagues Barna and Alex will take you through the practical side in detail. Alex will start to explain what KSeF actually is as a system, how invoices come to life in KSeF, how businesses interact with the platform, and where the technical pitfalls tend to appear. Barna will then deal with the operational realities, the deadlines, the AP pool model, the data challenges we already see in live implementations. Their goal today is simple: to translate this regulation into day-to-day reality of your finance and tax teams. And yes, we will talk about rejected invoices. I promise it won't be as painful as the first time you saw one in your system. With that, let me hand over to Alex to take us into the operational side of what's coming in 2026.
Thank you, Paul. As you can see, this is our agenda for today. We will go through some theoretical and some practical parts. My colleague Barna will take over in the second part, and in the beginning, we'll start with some more theory. So let's start by saying what KSeF actually is. KSeF is the national e-invoice system. It is Poland's central platform for issuing, sending, receiving, and storing structured electronic invoices. Or in simpler terms, it's the place where Polish VAT invoices formally come to life. Additionally, at EU level, the VAT regulations are underway, and Poland is actively aligning KSeF with the new European rules. The goal is to keep KSeF stable, reliable, and fully compatible as Europe moves toward a harmonized digital VAT framework. One point that is especially important to remember is that KSeF is not just a reporting tool. It is an actual system where invoices are created and legally issued, similar to the clearance model in Italy. Once an invoice passes through KSeF, it becomes an official tax document recognized by the Polish tax authorities. That is why KSeF is not just a technical change, it is a fundamental change on how invoicing works in Poland. So how can you use KSeF in practice? Well, there are several ways to work with KSeF, depending on how your organization is set up. First, you can use your own financial or accounting software, integrated with KSeF via an API connection. This is the most common option for companies with higher invoice volumes, as invoices can be generated directly from the ERP and sent automatically to KSeF in the background. Secondly, the Ministry of Finance of Poland provides its own tools through the official portal. These are mainly used by smaller businesses or as a backup solution. Thirdly, there is a KSeF mobile application, which allows you to prepare and issue invoices on the go from the comfort of your own smartphone. And finally, you can authorize an external reporting specialist, like us. We will be able to manage KSeF reporting on your behalf. This means that you do not have to deal with technical setup, changing legislation, or ongoing monitoring yourself. But what are some of the key benefits of KSeF? Well, first and foremost, KSeF enables near real-time delivery of invoices. It supports automated processing through direct system integration. Now, invoices are available online for 10 years, so no local archiving is actually required. Additionally, it allows for faster VAT refunds, which are reduced from 60 to 40 days, improving cash flow of the companies. And it provides a higher transactional trust, as invoices are issued only by authorized parties, thus reducing potential fraud. Then you might ask, to whom does KSeF apply? Well, all local Polish taxpayers must issue e-invoices via KSeF, regardless of the legal form or if they are VAT exempt. KSeF is not intended for reporting purchases from foreign suppliers. That will be addressed under the VIDA framework. KSeF is strictly for issuing invoices under Polish VAT law, including those issued to foreign contractors. Speaking of foreign contractors, what about foreign entities? Well, a foreign entity is not required to use KSeF if it has no registered office or fixed establishment in Poland, or if it has a fixed establishment in Poland, but that establishment is not involved in a taxable supply. However, voluntary use is allowed and actually encouraged, because that leads to reduced cost and better compliance of the business overall aligned with the VIDA directive. But what happens in the case that there is an issue with the internet, let's say, or with a connection? Well, KSeF has also made sure that there is an offline 24 mode. This allows taxpayers to use structured invoices outside of KSeF in case of network or internet outages. These invoices must be submitted to KSeF no later than the next business day. And also, in the case that there is no internet access at all, then a special authorization can give access to someone else who can take care in your behalf. Later on, my colleague Barna will mention a few errors within the XML format. However, I want to mention also a few potential human errors that might occur. So, what if an invoice contains an error such as an incorrect amount or quantity, but it has already been accepted by KSeF? In that case, the invoice cannot be changed. You can only do that by issuing a corrective invoice instead. Additionally, I would also like to show the transactional scope. KSeF is and will be mandatory for B2G and B2B supplies, so business to government and business to business supplies. And B2C supplies, business to consumer, will remain voluntarily. They are already voluntarily and they will remain voluntarily even after February 2026. However, it would be good if a business have all of this invoicing aligned and structured in a harmonized way. But enough with the theory. Now I can go on and give the floor to my colleague Barna, which will have a little bit of theory, but will also have a lot of practical examples of how things can work in the KSeF environment. Barna, the floor is yours.
Thank you for introducing me. And we will start with the KSeF, the new reality. We believe that most of you have already read our newsletters, so you are familiar with the deadlines. Today, we'd like to focus more on something practical, the operational challenges that comes with them. Still, a quick recap never hurts, so here are the key dates. First, February 2026. The companies with annual revenue above 200 million zloty are mandated to use the e-invoicing through KSeF. Then, from 1st April, the requirement extends to smaller companies as well. Micro entrepreneurs have time until the end of 2026 to comply with the rules. Also, there is a grace period until the beginning of 2027, and this means that there are no penalties applied by the Polish tax authorities. We would also like to highlight that as a general rule, every invoice visualization like a PDF should contain a QR code. This is applicable for both the local transactions and the intercommunity transactions. With this QR code, the buyer can validate the invoice. So the grace period is something like a relief, but actually it is a bit dangerous. It can make you comfortable and delay action. So we call it the false security trap. In reality, IT projects involving API implementation can take several months to build and then a few more to test. So there is no time to waste for you. You should think about the grace period not as an extra time to relax, but more like an opportunity to refine and strengthen your e-invoicing setup. The tax authorities will most likely use this time to enhance their audit tools, so your data needs to be just as perfect. Many companies right now are focused entirely on issuing e-invoices. They are concentrating on getting the outbound systems ready, and yes, that is really important. But the real danger is the silent one, the receiving. Think about this way. Your accounts receivable deadline, your issuing timeline, all of that becomes completely irrelevant if your Polish suppliers decide to use KSeF from February 2026. That means you must be ready to process incoming invoices as the buyer. This isn't optional, this is something you cannot delay. Without the proper setup, you might lose your right of VAT deduction, and that will hit your cash flow. So, early readiness of your accounts payable and finance systems isn't just recommended, it's mandatory. The pool model is something that changes the system fundamentally. In KSeF, your suppliers don't send the invoices in the traditional way, like emails, but they upload it to KSeF, and then you have to be ready to pool them. You need to download the invoices directly from the government portal. This is critical since if your system isn't set up to poll the API constantly, you simply won't be receiving any invoices and you won't be aware of them. They will sit there and they will be invisible for your team, which can lead to late data processing. And that comes hand in hand with the VAT deduction timing. The legal receipt date that determines your right to deduct VAT is no longer when your accountant opens the email, but is the timestamp when KSeF assigns the invoice number. So delays in downloading the invoices mean delays in VAT recovery. Let me give you a scenario that can easily happen. Your supplier tells you, I already sent the invoice to KSeF. Your AP team checks, but they can't see it. Without a process to automatically ingest the XML file, you cannot approve the payment. Next steps, credit holds, tense supplier relationships, both affecting your supply chain negatively. And if you have the right systems in place, that can be prevented. So, to wrap this up, issuing is visible, everyone can see it, everyone is preparing for it. While receiving is silent, it happens in the background, and that's what makes it dangerous. The preparation time doesn't start in February or March next year, it starts today, because these systems take time to build, time to test, and time to polish. So on this slide, we will talk about the XML itself and a few common errors which we identified. First one is the NIP. The VAT number must be valid at the exact moment when the invoice is submitted because the system will check the validity real time. So if your master data is outdated, the invoice will be rejected. Next one is the exchange rate. If the rate is missing in case of an invoice issued in a foreign currency, or the exchange rate is in a wrong format, the invoice will be rejected. The third one is the invoice dates. For example, the order date or the payment date. These must follow a strict structure, so you need to use the exact format as indicated on the slide. If not, the invoice will be rejected. A more complex issue is the partial payment indicator and the partial payment date. The incorrect use of the indicator or the date will cause the invoice to be rejected. The system always checks the connection and the logic between the dates and the indicator, and if there is some discrepancy, the invoice will not be valid. And the last one is the VAT rate, field P12. The VAT rate for a normal local transaction should be indicated as 23 and not 0.23 or 23%. If there is a discrepancy, the system will flag it and the invoice will be rejected. We came up with a scenario for you about a rejection. So your company does a simple local sale in Poland and an e-invoice should be created in KSeF. However, the invoice is rejected and then a simple sales transaction can turn into a multi-day issue. Look at the below timeline. First, the rejection will be immediate. KSeF returns an error code via API within seconds, and you realize the invoice is not valid. Second one is the supplier investigation, when your finance team has to check the XML files if they are trained to do so, or if not, you have to contact a service provider. If the issue is identified, then you can go through the next step. Next step is contacting the buyer. Since they cannot see the invoice in KSeF, you will have to email them a PDF, which is not a valid e-invoice, and the buyer's AP approval is delayed. The following step is the internal correction. IT team has to be involved and they have to regenerate the XML file and test it via the validator tool before the resubmission. And the last step is, if everything is okay, the resubmission and the revalidation. So the correct invoice is submitted and then new timestamp rules apply, which can potentially shift VAT periods for both parties. The consequences of the rejection are increased operational costs, internal chaos, and buyer dissatisfaction. The whole process from the rejection until resubmission and validation can easily take a few hours work for different departments. If one of your teams are overloaded, then the issue may be resolved in a few days only. And if you have 10 or 20 invoice rejections every month, this can cause delays for every department, and the grace period creates a false comfort situation, serving as a dangerous distraction. The true costs are not the penalties which you can receive in 2027, but more the operational costs of fixing such rejected invoices. So the actual solution isn't just compliance, that's the minimum. The real solution is automation. Automated validation, ingestion, and mapping, which help catching rejections early before manual work starts. A smooth machine-to-machine communication minimizes operational costs and manual work, so you have to aim for that. Focus in automation now and don't aim for the bare minimum. Now let's talk about the changes when you are dealing with intra-community supplies. For example, you have a transaction to your buyer in Germany or Austria from Poland. Generally, inter-community supplies must be reported in KSeF as well. They will receive a KSeF ID number and a QR code, just like all other domestic transactions. The biggest difference here is that the buyer does not have access to KSeF. They cannot log in, they can pull the invoice from the government server. So you as a supplier must deliver the invoice separately. As a PDF via email is the most general way. However, the QR code linking the KSeF validation should be included on the PDF. From the structural side, in the XML there are a few fields that you have to get right. First, the EU VAT ID of the buyer. This is the replacement for the NIP for the local transactions. If you get this wrong, if you have incorrect format or incorrect country prefix, it will lead to rejection. Second one is the VAT rate field. In case of intercommunity supplies, you have to indicate 0 VDT in this field. You cannot leave it empty, you cannot put 0, you have to indicate this exact wording. The third one is P22 or P22N, the flag for whether this is a supply of new means of transport or not. If you are not supplying new means of transport, you have to flag P22N. If you are, you flag P22. It sounds easy, but it can cause instant rejections. As Paul already mentioned, KSeF isn't just Poland's regulatory requirement. It is part of a much larger EU-wide shift towards digital tax compliance. The bigger picture is ViDA. ViDA will standardize e-invoicing, e-reporting, and digital cross-border transaction controls across the EU. Every member state eventually will operate under similar rules. Real-time data sharing is really important, just like structured invoices and automated validation. Companies that comply with the KSeF rules are not just meeting a Polish deadline. They are preparing their infrastructure and their teams to ViDA. The APIs you build now, the data validation systems you implement, the automation frameworks you establish in KSeF will serve you on the road to ViDA. So don't think of KSeF as a compliance burden, but more like an opportunity of future-proofing. The companies that move now will have their systems ready by the time ViDA is live. To wrap this up, the key takeaways. First, AP readiness. Your accounts payable systems must be ready to pull and process KSeF invoices automatically. This isn't optional, this is mandatory. Second one is the data quality. Every field matters. The NIP format, EU VAT numbers, VAT rates, exchange rates. Small errors can lead to rejections and a lot of headaches. Third one is avoiding operational chaos. The grace period is not free time, it's an opportunity for you to automate before the penalties arrive. Every rejected invoice costs you time, money, and productivity. Automation can eliminate that. And finally, future-proofing for ViDA. KSeF is not the endpoint, it's just a stepping stone to EU-wide digital tax compliance. The systems you build today will serve you when ViDA arrives. The companies that move now will be ready, while the ones that wait will scramble. And with that, I give it back to you, Paul. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Barna. So, by now you've heard from Barna where the operational pressure points are, and from Alex on how KSeF works in practice. What both perspectives make clear is that every challenge comes back to one thing: clean, structured data delivered in the right format at the right moment. This is exactly the problem that my tax flow was built to solve. With one integration to your ERP system, our platform converts your invoice data into the required compliant format, whether that's Poland today, Spain tomorrow, or any other jurisdiction that is in this fast-moving landscape, and delivers it directly to the tax authorities. Instead of building separate connections, separate mappings, and separate validation for every country, you centralize it once and let the system handle the variations. That reduces manual work, removes the risk that we discussed earlier, and gives your team space to focus on the actual tax questions rather than plumbing under the hood. So in short, one integration, consistent compliance everywhere, which, given the pace of the new mandates, is not a luxury, but a necessity. And if you'd like to see how it works in practice or discuss your own e-invoicing setup, you can reach us at info@gvc.tax or simply use the QR code on the screen to schedule a call. We're happy to walk you through what the transition would look for your organization. And with that, we move into the Q&A. We received some questions from participants. The first question: what type of FA3 invoices have to be emitted in the e-commerce context, VAT or ZAL? Why and how to handle them? And this question is for Alex.
Oh, thank you, Paul. So basically, there are 6 main invoice types, FA types, if you will, that you can use It is the VAT for a standard basic invoice. It is the KOR for a corrective invoice to a VAT invoice. Then there is the ZAL, which is an advance invoice. So this means that the payment is received before delivery. Then it is the ROZ, which corresponds to a final issued invoice after the ZAL, so after the advance invoice. And then there is the correction to the ZAL, so it is a correction of an advance invoice. And also there is the UPR for simplified invoices. But to get back to the question, if it is a standard invoice, then you use VAT. But in the case of an advanced invoice, then what you have to make sure is that you never issue ZAL after the delivery. So after shipment, the correct document is a final VAT invoice, ROZ. This settles the earlier sent invoice of ZAL. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you, Alex. The next questions. What can I do to mitigate the rejection of XML invoices and prevent any disruption due to data issues? Question for Barna.
Yeah, as mentioned, the master data is really important. So you need to update your VAT IDs, tax codes you have there, and you should use a data validation tool to check the invoices before you send them to KSeF.
Thank you, Barna. Now, the next question. How does self-billing work under e-invoicing in Poland? Question for Alex.
Thank you, Paul. The short answer is yes, self-billing is allowed, including actually cross-border self-billing. Basically, what happens is a buyer may issue an invoice on behalf of the seller, but that can happen only if the seller has granted prior authorization in KSeF. Additionally, cross-border buyers from other EU countries with a valid VAT number may issue invoices on behalf of a Polish seller under self-billing, provided, of course, that the transaction qualifies as an intercommunity supply and KSeF authorization is in place.
Thank you, Alex. Barna, we are currently using Sage X3 is one of the questions I have here, which we already know that is not supported by a couple of e-invoicing providers. Can this system be integrated with your platform, and what would be the estimated time frame for implementation?
Our platform is designed to sit between any ERP system and KSeF or other e-invoicing platform. And we are confident that we can connect Sage X3 to our solution via API. The exact timeline depends on your setup and scope, so we could confirm an estimate after a short technical assessment.
Thank you, Barna. For Alex, will the system be available in English?
That's an interesting question. Well, KSeF's technical formats and XML are actually language neutral so that every computer can understand them. Some documentation will indeed be available in English. However, the official government user interface is largely in Polish. At this moment, we are unaware if there are plans for a full English version of the official KSeF user interface.
Thank you, Alex. And for Barna, we've been using an in-house developed ERP system, and I'm worried about the compatibility with e-invoicing providers. What is your experience with custom-built ERP solution, and how flexible is your platform when it comes to integrating with non-standard systems?
So, as mentioned earlier, our system is generally able to provide support for any ERP system. And as long as your system is able to export the required data, the connection and the mapping are possible. However, with the custom ERPs, we see a bit more time and effort to connect them with standard ERP systems.
Thank you, Barna. And we have time for one final question for Alex. Are we still compliant if a middleware is used to map XML data to ERP master data?
Well, technically, yes, you remain compliant when using a middleware, as long as legal authorization stays with your company and the data is sent to KSeF is complete, accurate, and traceable back to your ERP, you shouldn't have any problems. I mean, if we visualize it, it should go from an ERP system to a middleware to KSeF, and then from KSeF to a middleware to ERP. So middleware acts just as a conduit, thus it should not break compliance or cause any problems.
Thank you, Alex. And that concludes our Q&A. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I hope you learned about KSeF and what it can mean for your business. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we really look forward to seeing you for one of our other webinars. For today, thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.